Alright, it's getting on a bit in the day now, but I needed to take a break, so uh, JD with another car story for you. This one is my beloved Holden Torana, probably one of my, well, it would be the most, it's number one on the favourite car list, to be fair. I came across this thing. It was bizarre. I was first introduced to the Holden Torana from a work colleague from my first out of school job. I was sorting packages at a local freight company, and from Monday to Friday, this guy drove I think it was a 93 Subaru Legacy, which he ended up selling to a friend of mine, and it was a deal that was a little bit sour, but regardless. And for a long time, those were the only days that I worked. I didn't work on the weekends because I was basically far too shattered. And an opportunity came up for me to do some Saturday morning work, which was a horrifically early start, and I wasn't really able to get there by myself. So I asked this colleague for a ride, and he obliged. He said, "Yep, I'll pick you up Saturday morning. I'll park down the end of your street though, so meet me at the street corner." And I thought, well, he's just doing that so he doesn't have to come into the street and turn around. I later found out that was also part of it, but for a different reason. So it's like 4 o'clock or 4:30 in the morning because we had to be there at 5, and I'm standing on the corner, and this absolutely gorgeous yellow, Tweety Bird yellow Holden Torana comes up the road and stops. And Jason winds down his window and says, "Hey, jump in." I am instantly just taken back with this car. I was still, like, I don't think I even had my learner's license yet, which was not to say that I wasn't driving. I was very naughty and I was driving before I had my learner's license, but that's a story for another day. And he guns this thing, and I am just, I'm excited and also panicked because I've never been in a car this fast before. And it was just great. I absolutely fell in love with this thing, and I thought, at some point in my life, I have to have one. And some friends of mine, that's right, I got them jobs at the same place, and they hadn't lasted long, but anyway. They all ended up learning about this car and seeing it, and they were just like, wow. And so it became known as my Elenor. It was the car that at some point in my life, I had to have, and I was going to stop at nothing to get it. It's probably 6 years down the line. I've left that job, doing other bits and pieces, but I've got to have one of these cars at some point. I'm helping a friend pick up a car from, it was quite a way up the countryside. It was about a 4-hour drive. And so we take turns driving. And Darren's driving the first stretch because it's his new car, understandably. And we get down a little way, and then we swap drivers, and so I take it for a bit of a drive. And there was a very direct route home which involved going over Rimataka Hill, which would have been actually great fun in this thing. But I didn't want anything to happen to the car. The Rimataka Hill is quite a notorious road. There's slips, there is stones on the road more often than not. There are logging trucks or all sorts of freight trucks where things sort of come flying off the back, and there was a risk of ruining the paintwork or having something go through the window, getting held up. And this was it a Mark II or Mark III? No, Mark II it must have been, Ford Capri. So there was a very real risk of, not trying to just afford it all, but in older cars, these things have a tendency to happen. If we got stuck behind a truck going too slow, or the truck stalled on the hill or something with us behind it, there was a very real risk of us sitting and overheating the engine and doing some damage. So I wasn't really too keen to go over this hill, even though it was the most direct way home. So I ended up tiki-touring by like an hour or an hour and a half's detour to come over. We came back through sort of Palmerston North and through the coast, and we got through Palmy, got through pretty much, I think we were most of the way through the coast, and it was like Otaki or something anyway. I just spotted this thing out the corner of my eye, and I said, I think that was one of those Toranas that I've always talked about. Darren goes, well, nah, didn't you say they were pretty rare? And I said, yeah, but I'm pretty sure that was one. He goes, well, turn around and show me, I want to have a look. And I'm thinking, man, we've been on the road for hours, like I really just want to get home. But also wanting to show off what these Toranas look like, and he's never seen one. So we turn around, and, we're about a kilometre up the road at this point, so finally turn around, go back, and I find this thing on the side of the road, and we get out to be nosy, and get out, and as I peer through the window, I noticed it's got a for sale sign that was written on some core flute, which had gotten hot in the sun, so it had folded in on itself and basically fallen off the windshield where it was displayed for sale. So this car was for sale, but not many people would have known unless you looked in and on the floor. So I phoned the guy up and sort of say, hey, ringing about the car for sale. Oh, yeah, hasn't been a lot of interest in it. I'm thinking I know exactly why. And I said, well, is it possible to take for a test drive? Guy says, oh, yeah, I'm actually just in a workshop down the road from it. Come down and, we'll have a chat. You can ask any questions. So we do that. And he ends up giving me the keys. And he says, well, take it for a drive and then bring it back to me because I want to take it off the main road. It's been out there for a couple of weeks and I'm a bit worried about it. So I quite happily get the key, and I'm thinking, hey, this guy's pretty trusting. Take this car for a drive around the block, but I notice the interior has been rebuilt and it's been done amazingly well, and there's a bit of a secret to the interior as well. So take it for a drive. I'm thinking this thing runs great. It's painfully slow compared to Jason's one, but I knew that Jason's one had a very, very worked engine. I had the keys to my Elenor in hand, so I drive around to his workshop, and he's like, "Hey, have you got any questions?" And I said, "Yeah. When can I buy it?" He said, "Oh, well, do you need it inspected or anything?" I said, "No, it doesn't matter. It's fine." Not the best negotiating tactic, and I paid his asking price for it. I had to have this car, and so that's fine. I sort of said, hey, look, I'll it's definitely sold. I'm definitely 100% going to take it. Here's my number. Here's my details. Here's everything. I will come back, in a few days and pick this thing up from you. So I do. We get the Capri back. I think it was like 2 days later or 3 days later. Darren gives me a ride up there, drops me off. I collect the car, and I'm just absolutely in love with it. It's in black. It had the CSA wheels. This thing was incredible. I was absolutely in love, and I've still got pictures of it everywhere. I think my wife gets sick of seeing it. I've got a picture of it in the hallway. But anyway, then I'm visiting Darren, of all people, the guy that I was with, picking up his car and who sort of helped me get this thing. And he lived on a pretty busy main road in the middle of town. And I'm leaving his house. I think I'm getting the Capri ready for paint, of all things. But anyway, I reverse out of his driveway, and it's quite a long driveway. He's like, the second house down the drive sort of thing. So I reverse out. I reverse all the way out into the middle of the road. I chuck it in first. I, take my foot off the clutch and apply the throttle, and this thing goes nowhere. Ah, crap. Quickly, neutral, give it the wiggle, back into first, foot off clutch, nothing. It's bound up. It sounds like it's trying to do something, but it's just not moving. Ah, crap. Into reverse. Yeah, well, reverse works. Okay, back into first. Nothing. Into second. I've got a couple of cars behind me now that have come to a stop wondering what the hell is this guy doing. Into second, it lurches forward, but then something again happens. I'm just like, I need to get this thing off the road. I don't care how. So, into third gear. And, at this time I've sort of forgotten that, hey, third gear is actually really, really low on this. And I stall it. Crap, back into neutral, restart the engine, back into third. Foot all the way down on the throttle, ease off the clutch, and I managed to get this thing moving. And luckily I didn't live too far from Darren's place. It was probably like an 8-kilometre drive, and there were a few there's like 2 roundabouts, 2 or 3 sets of lights, and 2 or 3 stop signs, but kind of straightish roads if you took a slightly odd route to get from his place to mine. So I managed to do that without having to come to a complete stop. I get it there in third gear, get it home, spin it around in the street, and by this time I've well and truly learnt why Jason didn't want to come down the street. One, the car was incredibly loud, his Torana, and second of all, these things did not have power steering, and I lived at the end of a cul-de-sac. It was like a gym workout every time you drove in and tried to turn around at the end of the cul-de-sac. It was like I had arm muscles to rival Arnold Schwarzenegger after a few months of owning this thing. But I loved it. So I got it home. It came to a stop in the middle of the street, and I was able to reverse it up the drive. And I thought, well, realistically, I've only got reverse in this thing. It's not going to move forward again. I put it in the garage, up on axle stands rather. I jacked the thing up. I drop the old engine and transmission out, and I'm like, well, I've got to find a new one. By an absolute fluke, I had phoned a local Holden dealer and said, hey, I'm looking for a replacement for this 173 engine that's completely packed up. The transmission's gone, the engine's not sounding the healthiest. I need some sort of drivetrain package to get this thing back on the road again. Oh yeah, well, we'll have to look into it for you. Took my details. He said, look, it could be like a month or so before we get back to you. I'm gutted, mate. Elenor is going to be off the road. It was the next day I got a text message from Jason saying, hey man, I am putting a new engine in my car. It's going to be V8 and everything. If you want the old one, you can grab it for a really good price. It's the motor, the gearbox, drive shaft, the whole lot. And like, this was just an unbeatable deal. It was like $400 or something, or $500. This was for a 186 originally red top engine. It had yellow Terra heads, it had a Torque 2 manifold, it had a Holly carburetor, it had the Celica 5-speed box, it had a shortened and lightened drive shaft. It was like, this was an incredible package that I picked up for like nothing. And so, like, hell yeah, I'm going to grab this thing. And at the same time, a friend of mine had an Isuzu Piazza that the engine had given way, but these things were four-wheel drive and were known for being quite tough in the rest of the drivetrain. So I picked up his rear diff, and I had that rebuilt and modified the spline on it, and that ended up going into the Torana. I think I had to do something else with the drive shaft again, we just changed the yoke. So now basically it fits with this really nice engine, this Celica 5-speed box, this nice lightweight drive shaft, and now I've got a modified Piazza differential in the back. And I try to put it in at home, and the car rolls off the rolls off the ramps and everything, and tries to bloody kill me. It dents its own sill, which annoyed me no end. It wasn't working out. I'm trying to do this all in the garage. So a friend of mine it was actually Darren again, the guy with the Capri. He had a workshop that he actually leased it at the time, or he had use of it in some way, shape or form anyway. So this Torana went in, and motor and gearbox went in, and we couldn't quite get the gearbox to do its thing properly, and so Jason came around, gave me a hand, Darren's giving me a hand, I'm doing this thing. And late one night, I'm trying to put one part of it back together, and I'm lifting something up, and anyway, it turns out the gearbox, we hadn't put the cross member on, which I knew, but I thought it was bolted up to the engine, and it turns out it wasn't, and so this gearbox comes loose and cracks me in the head and knocks me out. Another friend that I was studying with at the time, he sees the lights on in the workshop, so comes in to give me a hand, finds me knocked out underneath this car, takes me to the hospital. I don't think my parents knew any of this had happened. But, I wake up in hospital, and of course you have a concussion, they want to monitor you for a while, and this nurse kept coming in to wake me up, which I got sick of, and I said, look, next time you wake me up, you're going to end up in the hospital bed, next to me sort of thing. Not the wisest thing to do, threatening the nurse, because the next nurse that came in was a 7-foot Samoan gentleman that must have weighed about 300 kilos. So I was not going to argue with him, and he was quite fine to wake me up every 2 hours to make sure I was okay. So that was a bit of fun. I get back, finally put the rest of the car together, make some adjustments to the clutch, and the car's running. It's a little bit out of tune, but that's fine. I spend the next couple of weeks tuning it up. And then I learned about this great system called nitrous oxide. And it's not like you see in the Fast and Furious movies, Fast and Furious 38, where you hit buttons and you get this instant shot of NOS and it takes you off, like all the Need for Speeds and stuff follow this. It's not at all how nitrous works. And I bought a system from a company called Zex, and it was an interesting system, and it came with all these instructions and all these bits, and I picked it up for a bit of a song because nobody had heard of Zex. So it was a completely unknown brand, but I thought, well, hey, I'm willing to take a risk. And there are multiple ways of doing it, and you hear people talking about dry shot and wet shot and everything else. And basically, all I did was, in order to tune my carburetor properly, because in the meantime too, I'd got some different internals to the head, a different manifold, and a different carburetor from a gentleman who used to work on Peter Brock's crew. So there were all these bits, and some of them were from a Peter Brock car, and some of them weren't. But anyway, he ended up just sending this massive box over with all these parts, and some of them I used, and some of them I didn't. I put the new cam in. It was a cam assembly, so the old 186 was a push rod onto rockers, and I think it had like roller rockers or something fitted, but basically, yeah, you could change. We changed all the timing. I changed, I think, valve springs. I changed the valves as well. They ended up as like nitrile valves, and There was all sorts, and this thing got worked even further. But part of tuning it, because it wasn't quite running as powerfully as I remembered it, is I had to put a big spacer between the carburetor and the manifold, so that basically you were, to all intents and purposes, increasing the Venturi effect that the air rushing past the needles and stuff were creating. So I had to put the spacer, which then meant everything had such a flow-on effect. It meant that my air cleaner, and the old cars, you had this big round sort of baking tin air cleaner, big chrome air cleaner, which looked amazing, but with my spacer on, that no longer fitted, so I had to get a different air cleaner. Like, everything had all these flow-on effects. But I put the spacer in there, which is just basically a clump of steel, which had the bolt holes going through. It obviously had your Venturi, your sort of tunnel, just a hole going from top to bottom. It was nothing really special. So we got that in there, and the car was running fine. Now, when I got this nitrous system, there was 100 different ways you could set it up. I ended up basically having... It was, again, meant to be a lot more sophisticated than it was. I basically had a open... It wasn't quite an open hose. There was like a little needle injector sort of thing to help spray it in the right direction. But even that had its own complications. It ended up rotating the needle. It basically had a cut on an angle at the end of the needle, and that's where the gas came through. And my system was a really, really rudimentary... what did I use in the end? I used something as a timer circuit, but basically it kind of looked like the system in the movies. I had a whole ton of missile switches, which is the red covers, and you pop the cover open and then you got the switch inside. And I had two of those, which were two solenoids that I think I'd actually kept over from a LPG Falcon that I had. So you armed these two solenoids and you flick the switch open, which opened the first two solenoids, which were closest to the gas bottles. It then had another switch which turned on a preheater, so it warmed the metallic line that the gas would go through before it hit the rubber hose, before it went into this manifold spacer. And so you basically had to turn the gas on to fill that line up, and then you could heat the line. So it took a little bit of preparation. And then finally I had 3 buttons which were connected to 3 different timer modules. So I think one was 3 seconds, one was 5 seconds, and one was 10 seconds. And so basically, kind of like you saw in the movies, you arm them up, open the first 2, which were basically safety solenoids, warm the pipe up, because as gas sort of goes from compressed to non-compressed, it cools, and you could easily freeze the line up and cause blockages or damage the solenoids or something like that. So that's why you had to have the preheater in there. And then the final, the 3 buttons were connected to timer circuits, which opened a solenoid that was sort of fastened into this block, and that's what gave you your shot of NOS. So the nitrous oxide would flow in. It would just basically mix with the air and fuel that was already coming through the carburetor. So my system was known as a wet shot, and yeah, you either gave it a 3, 5 or 10 second squirt, and there was nothing to stop you from just continuously holding these buttons down and just going until the tank was dry. Or so I thought. So that was great fun. And basically, like I say, it's not at all in the movies where you're driving along and then you hit the button and you suddenly get this massive boost. It's essentially raising that octane rate to a huge amount and becoming an awful lot more flammable. You're getting a bigger bang in the engine, but it's not as dramatic as they show. But it is enough to notice when you are just putting your foot flat. So again, these were completely illegal, and every time it went for a warrant of fitness, the system was quite well concealed anyway, but we would basically and again it was kind of clever because we would change out from the front solenoid, we would put a water tank with a water pump in there, and so if anybody asks, it was a water injection system, which funnily enough also helps increase horsepower if you know what you're doing and you have everything set up right. This was not that case. The water injection was just so it could get a warrant of fitness. But you could basically be along in 5th gear on the motorway quite happily, stomp your foot down, give it a 5-second squirt, and the car would really roar off. It's kind of like the equivalent of turning your, I don't know, if we've got Holden fans here, it was the equivalent of turning your 3.8 litre Commodore into a 5.7 litre Commodore for a few seconds. It was just, the power wasn't stupidly push you back in your seat, but it all of a sudden had an awful lot more. I used that for drag racing. I would hit it really heavily with like the 10-second shot. So basically, once the car was moving and off the line, so as to avoid stupidly excessive wheel spin, it would move, basically from moving, hit the button into 2nd gear, and that was the only way. I mean, I managed to run a 9.8 second quarter mile with that thing, which out of a 1.86, this is a straight 6 engine, no forced induction whatsoever, but everything was right on the limit. And then, like I say, you add some nitrous to that with the stupidly wide and dangerous for road use tyres that we had. It did that, but it also came at the expense of the engine, because not long after that, I actually ended up selling the car, so I never found it, but the gentleman that bought the car, he pulled it all apart, and the block was cracked in 2 places. The head was about ready to give way. It was starting to get some warp on it. There were signs of heat damage everywhere. So yes, the nitrous had basically cooked the engine, so it was very much reminiscent of Brian's Eclipse in the Fast and Furious movies. It was cooked. It was not going to be doing great numbers for any length of time. So that car I sold because I was going to kill myself in it. It was ridiculously overpowered. I was still too young to have something with that much power at my disposal. And I'd actually had an accident in a friend's boss's car, and there were some mitigating circumstances, but the accident was my fault. So I had to pay for the repairs to this car. I didn't have that money on me at the time. I'd already made up my mind that I was going to sell the Torana anyway, so I ended up selling this thing for way less than what I'd actually put into it in the end. But the important thing was that I got rid of it and that I could do right by my friend, so that's what we did. That car got pulled apart. The Celica gearbox, the drive shaft, the differential. After the guy tried to kill the diff doing burnouts and realised, oh, actually this thing's stupidly strong, he ended up swapping it over into his Torana. My body got stored somewhere, and then the gentleman that owned the car didn't pay the storage guy, so I think storage guy took the car as payment, and the car's been hidden and it's been sort of gone backwards and forwards, and I don't know what the end state of it was. I would love to know where that car is, and I would actually probably quite enjoy buying it back if that's an option. So if you know where my black LC Torana is, I don't care that it has no drivetrain or anything in it at the moment. I'm quite happy to sort that out at a later date. But assuming that it hasn't been crushed or completely demolished by rust or anything, I mean, I had cut new sills into that. It had a fair amount of work to keep it on the road, a new fuel tank and everything, because the old one rusted out, as they were all inclined to do. So if anyone knows where that black Torana is, I can't remember what the number plate started with. I've got some photos of it somewhere, and I'll try and add them up. But yeah, if you know where that car is, I would absolutely love to know who owns it, where it is, and how much they want for it, because I would love to have it back. But that thing used to race XR6 turbos, and if we were in a straight line, this Torana would swamp them, just constantly without the nitro system. Cornering was not its strong suit because it had no power steering, and it had the steering geometry of a early 70s vehicle. But yeah, it was great. It was so much fun. So yes, I'd love to know where it is. That's the story of the Torana, and I will see you in the next video.